Ever wondered if vampires are more than just myths? Journey with us into the shadowy corners of history as we uncover the secret history of vampires, truth hidden in ancient legends. From blood-drinking demons in ancient Mesopotamia to mysterious figures in medieval Europe, these creatures have haunted human imagination for millennia. But what if these legends were rooted in reality? In this video, we'll explore chilling folklore, secret societies, and historical accounts that reveal a hidden world behind the vampire myth. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about these nocturnal beings, and step into the darkness. The origins of vampire legends, a tale of blood and shadow. Long before the castles of Transylvania and the novels of Gothic fiction, the notion of the vampire was born in the shadowed corners of human fear and imagination. The legend of the vampire did not arise from a single place or people. It emerged from a mosaic of cultures, each contributing its own terrors, superstitions, and warnings about death, disease, and the unknown. In the earliest days, humans struggled to comprehend the finality of death. Bodies decayed in ways that seemed unnatural. Loved ones disappeared into the soil, leaving only whispered memories. In regions plagued by famine and disease, corpses sometimes showed signs of life after burial, bloated, discolored, or strangely preserved. These observations sowed the seeds of fear. How could the dead rise again? What might they want? The earliest written accounts of creatures resembling vampires appear in Mesopotamian and ancient Near Eastern texts. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians spoke of demonic spirits such as the Akimu, restless spirits of the dead who returned to haunt the living. These entities were not undead in the sense of modern vampires, but they did feed upon life force, causing disease or misfortune. The lesson was moral as well as practical: respect the dead, honor burial rites, and avoid attracting the wrath of restless spirits. Across the Mediterranean, the Greeks told tales of Lamia and Empusa, monstrous women who drank the blood of children or seduced young men to death. These figures embodied human anxieties about predation, sexuality, and mortality. In each story, the vampire was less a person and more a warning: beware what lurks when the sun is gone, and respect the fragile boundary between life and death. It was in Eastern Europe, however, that the figure most familiar to us today began to take shape. The Slavic peoples, particularly in the regions that would become modern-day Romania, Serbia, and Poland, nurtured elaborate beliefs about the vampire, or yupa, as it was called in many dialects. Here, the vampire was feared not just as a metaphor but as a tangible threat. Epidemics of disease, combined with mysterious deaths in villages, gave rise to rituals intended to prevent the dead from rising. Corpses might be staked through the heart, decapitated, or burned, practices that seem brutal today but were born of intense necessity and superstition. The origins of these practices are grounded in observation. When a person died from certain illnesses, the body might appear strangely preserved. Skin could darken, nails and hair seemed to grow, and blood sometimes seeped from the mouth or nose due to post-mortem changes. For people who did not understand decomposition, these signs were proof that the deceased could still harm the living. Folk remedies, driving a stake through the heart, placing garlic in the mouth, or scattering seeds for the corpse to count, were preventive measures, attempts to control the uncontrollable. Vampire legends were not confined to rural superstition. They crept into literature and law. In 18th century Eastern Europe, mass hysteria over alleged vampire attacks led to public exhumations. Villagers would dig up graves to check for signs of vampirism, often performing dramatic rituals to destroy the corpse. Reports describe bodies with blood around the mouth, fresh wounds, or red eyes, evidence that reinforced communal fears. These events were recorded by local officials, creating a fascinating intersection of folklore, religion, and early forensic observation. Religious beliefs played a central role in shaping vampire mythology. Christianity introduced concepts of sin, the soul, and the afterlife that dovetailed with older superstitions. The vampire became not just a creature of the flesh but a moral threat, embodying sin and punishment. In Orthodox Christian regions, for example, clergy were often called upon to bless graves and exorcise bodies, preventing the undead from returning. Saints and holy symbols, crosses, holy water, and prayers, became protective tools. The vampire, in this sense, represented the dangerous liminality between earthly and divine law, a being outside the order of both life and death. Across Europe, as tales traveled and transformed, the vampire became increasingly seductive and intelligent. By the 18th and 19th centuries, literature began to shape modern perceptions. In 1819, John Polidori, a physician and writer, published The Vampire, which introduced the aristocratic vampire, a figure both terrifying and alluring. Polidori drew inspiration from Gothic romances and the personal obsessions of his circle, including Lord Byron. Here, the vampire was no longer a simple revenant feeding out of necessity. It was a predator with cunning, charm, and human guile. This evolution continued with Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897. Stoker synthesized centuries of folklore into a coherent, chilling narrative. Dracula was a nobleman, a foreign invader, and a supernatural force, capable of terrorizing both individuals and societies. The novel codified many elements now associated with vampires: their aversion to sunlight, need to consume blood, ability to mesmerize, and methods of destruction. Stoker's work transformed the vampire from a folkloric horror into a literary archetype, a symbol of repressed fears, forbidden desires, and the tension between modernity and tradition. Yet, behind every vampire story lies a kernel of truth. Many scholars suggest that outbreaks of rabies, tuberculosis, or porphyria may have influenced these myths. Rabies, for example, can cause sensitivity to light, biting behavior, and foaming at the mouth, traits reminiscent of vampire lore. Tuberculosis, often called consumption, would leave victims pale, frail, and anemic, feeding fears that the disease itself was a form of vampirism. These real-life afflictions, filtered through superstition and fear, became the supernatural traits of the vampire. Vampire legends also reflect social anxieties. In agrarian communities, untimely deaths were often blamed on supernatural causes, reinforcing social cohesion and control. The vampire served as a cautionary tale: respect tradition, honor your elders, and fear those who transgress natural or moral laws. Later, as the vampire entered urban Gothic literature, it became a vehicle for exploring sexuality, power, and mortality, themes that remain central in contemporary vampire stories. Across continents, cultures developed analogous creatures. In China, the jiangshi is a hopping corpse that drains life force. In West Africa, the assamin or bloodsucking which causes illness and death. In Native American traditions, some spirits or monsters consume the vitality of the living. These parallels suggest that the fear of the dead returning is nearly universal, a reflection of humanity's struggle with mortality and the unknown. Ultimately, vampire legends endure because they are adaptable. Each era, society, and author reshapes them to reflect contemporary fears and desires. In the medieval imagination, the vampire was a pestilential force. In Victorian fiction, a charming predator. In modern cinema, a complex antihero or tragic figure. The legends continue to evolve, but their core, the fear of death, disease, and the transgression of natural law, remains unchanged. Even now, in the age of science and technology, the vampire retains its power. It embodies anxieties that cannot be entirely rationalized: the fear of losing autonomy, the horror of disease, and the dread of what comes after death. Every story, from folklore to blockbuster films, preserves a thread of this ancient human concern. The origins of the vampire legend, therefore, are not merely a story about the undead, they are a story about us. The vampire is born wherever humans confront death without understanding, wherever disease or misfortune cannot be explained, and wherever the shadow of the unknown looms largest. From Mesopotamia to Transylvania, from folklore to literature, the vampire has always been a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears and our need to impose order on the chaos of existence. In some ways, the legend will never die. It has survived centuries because it adapts to human imagination. Every age rediscovers it, reshapes it, and uses it to explore the anxieties of the time. Today, we see vampires in novels, movies, and television, yet their roots remain buried in the fearful observations of villagers, the moral lessons of ancient texts, and the inexplicable signs of decay and disease. The vampire legend is a tapestry, woven from thousands of years of human experience, fear, and storytelling. And so, when we speak of vampires, we are not merely talking about monsters of the night. We are talking about a shared history of curiosity and terror, of science struggling to explain what superstition could only imagine, and of humans striving to give meaning to death. The vampire is, in essence, humanity's shadow, the part of ourselves that fears the unknown, that senses the fragility of life, and that tells stories to make sense of it all. From the Akimu of Mesopotamia to Dracula of Stoker, the vampire has been many things: demon, predator, moral lesson, seducer, and antihero. Each iteration illuminates the human psyche, revealing the timeless struggle to understand mortality, morality, and the mysteries beyond the grave. The legend endures, because as long as humans live, death will remain a riddle, and the vampire, a symbol of that eternal enigma. Word count, 1803. Explanation of the story and historical basis. Ancient origins. Mesopotamian and Greek myths introduced early vampire-like creatures, representing moral and physical threats. Eastern European folklore. Slavic myths gave rise to the vampire as a corpse that could physically harm the living, leading to rituals like staking and burning. Religious influence. Christian beliefs intertwined with folklore to emphasize moral consequences and protection through sacred rituals. Literary transformation. From Polidori to Stoker, the vampire became aristocratic, intelligent, and seductive, reflecting social anxieties and moral fears. Medical explanations. Real illnesses, such as rabies and tuberculosis, likely informed vampire characteristics. Cross-cultural parallels. Vampire-like figures appear globally, highlighting universal human fears about death, disease, and the unknown. Symbolic role. Vampires are enduring symbols of human curiosity, fear, and the struggle to understand mortality. Blood in the scrolls. Vampires in ancient texts and practices. In the shadowed corridors of history, where ink-stained manuscripts lie forgotten and clay tablets crumble to dust, there exist whispers of creatures who defy death, beings who feast upon the living to sustain their unnatural life. These beings, now called vampires, were not always the sleek, fanged aristocrats of modern imagination. They were once embedded deeply in ancient texts and rituals, entwined with the fears and beliefs of civilizations long past. The tale begins in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, where the earliest records of vampiric entities emerge. The Sumerians spoke of the Akimu, restless spirits of the dead who wandered the earth seeking to drain the vitality of the living. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, hints of such spirits permeate the narrative. The heroes face not only the monsters of flesh but also the intangible forces that could sap life without leaving a mark. The Akimu were believed to arise from improper burials or from those who had lived immoral lives, a testament to the Sumerians' fear that death could be violated, and the dead could return to disrupt the order of life. Archaeological findings in Ur and Nippur reveal small clay figures and inscriptions that appear to function as protective talismans against these spirits. The Mesopotamians etched warnings into homes and temples, prayers and incantations designed to prevent the Akimu from drawing the life force of the unwary. These texts indicate that the idea of the vampire was not a matter of fiction but an existential threat, intertwined with the daily practice of religion and magic. Centuries later, in ancient Egypt, the concept evolved yet maintained the same essence, a fear of the dead returning to drain the living. The Egyptians called these entities Ak, the spirits of those who had not achieved the necessary rites to pass into the afterlife. Unlike the Mesopotamian Akimu, the Ak could sometimes be appeased through offerings, suggesting a duality: the dead were feared, but their needs were acknowledged. Tomb inscriptions, particularly from the Book of the Dead, often contained spells aimed at both protecting the living and ensuring the dead remained in their appointed realm. Spell 125, which delineates the weighing of the heart, also implicitly warns that failure to maintain cosmic order could result in one spirit becoming malevolent, preying upon others as a form of eternal punishment. The Greeks and Romans brought a more philosophical lens to the phenomenon. Hesiod and later Ovid described spirits and revenants in ways that resemble vampires, often using the term lamia to describe female entities who drank the blood of children. Roman texts also mention the striges, nocturnal birds or spirits, known for their bloodlust. Interestingly, Roman legal codes included measures against revenants. They prescribed exhumation and ritual destruction of suspected undead to prevent harm to the living. These procedures, meticulously documented by Pliny the Elder and others, show a civilization attempting to codify fear into law, blending superstition with civic order. Meanwhile, in the East, Indian texts such as the Atharva Veda reference the Pishashas, flesh-eating demons that haunt graves and feed upon human vitality. Rituals to protect against Pishashas included chanting, offerings, and specific protective talismans, rituals strikingly similar to those in Mesopotamia and Egypt, despite geographical distance. This suggests a shared human concern. the anxiety that death is not an absolute boundary and that some force may persist, feeding on the living. The medieval imagination, however, is where the vampire truly begins to take recognizable form. In Slavic folklore, the Yupa was a revenant that could leave the grave, often associated with unnatural deaths or moral transgressions. The Slavs practiced detailed anti-vampire rites. Exhumation, staking through the heart, decapitation, and burning were common. Villagers recorded these practices in local chronicles, and church officials occasionally sanctioned them, blending folk knowledge with ecclesiastical authority. These texts, both official and oral, illustrate an evolving understanding. The vampire is no longer merely a spirit but a corporeal threat, a being that can physically interact with the world of the living. What is particularly fascinating is how these beliefs often intersected with medicine and science. Medieval physicians sometimes misinterpreted decomposition as evidence of vampirism. The appearance of fresh blood at the mouth of a corpse, now understood as a natural part of decomposition, was read as proof that the dead were feeding. Scholars like Johann Weyer in the 16th century challenged these interpretations, arguing that many cases of supposed vampirism were rooted in superstition, disease, or psychological disturbance. Yet even Weyer's writings acknowledged the cultural power of the vampire myth. Whether real or imagined, these entities shaped communal behaviors, funerary customs, and social law. In exploring these ancient texts, one finds recurring motifs: improper burial, moral failings, restless spirits, and the fear of death's breach. These motifs are not mere coincidence, they reflect the universal human anxiety about mortality. The vampire, in its many forms, is a mirror to societal concerns. The Sumerians feared moral neglect, the Egyptians feared cosmic disorder, the Romans feared civil instability, and the Slavs feared social contamination by the dead. In every case, the vampire is a symbol of disruption, an agent through which cultural anxieties are projected onto the unknown. Ritual practices provide further insight. Protective measures often involved iron, sunlight, and specific incantations. In ancient Greece, iron nails were sometimes placed in graves to prevent the dead from rising. In Slavic traditions, garlic and holy symbols were used to repel the Yupa. These practices, while varying in form, share a symbolic logic. The vampire is vulnerable to certain natural or spiritual forces, and humans can manipulate these forces to restore balance. Even in India, chanting specific hymns was believed to deter pishachas, indicating an understanding that the spoken word, when ritually empowered, could shape the unseen. The intersection of sexuality and morality also plays a role. Female vampiric entities, like the lamia and striges, often embody fears surrounding uncontrolled female desire. Male vampires in later Slavic traditions could also represent breaches of social order, such as violations of communal norms or kinship ties. Ancient texts frequently encode these anxieties allegorically, using the vampire as a vessel to explore ethical, sexual, and societal boundaries. In this sense, vampirism is not merely about blood, it is about power, transgression, and the consequences of stepping outside the expected order. The Renaissance brought a scholarly turn to vampire lore. Scholars began to catalogue these creatures systematically, tracing their origins in myth, religion, and history. Texts such as De Mastication Mortuorum in Tumulis, On the Chewing of the Dead in Tombs, by Johann Weber document exhumation reports and provide early proto-anthropological studies of vampirism. While many cases were clearly misinterpretations of natural decay, these texts reveal a careful attempt to reconcile folklore with empirical observation. They show that even as scientific reasoning advanced, cultural narratives about vampires remained resilient. It is worth noting that vampires, as presented in ancient texts, were often intimately tied to the notion of memory and legacy. The undead disrupt normal succession, inheritances, and social structures, threatening the continuity of community and family. In this sense, the vampire is a liminal figure, caught between life and death, embodying both personal transgression and societal instability. Ancient practices, staking, burning, or otherwise neutralizing revenants, were as much about restoring social equilibrium as they were about protecting individuals from harm. By the 18th century, vampire hysteria reached Europe in unprecedented waves, particularly in Eastern Europe. Reports of vampiric attacks, often accompanied by elaborate exhumation rituals, were disseminated in newspapers and pamphlets, blending folk belief, sensationalism, and scholarly curiosity. What is remarkable is how closely these modern cases mirror ancient descriptions: restless spirits, improper burial, moral or social transgression, and blood consumption. The continuity suggests that despite centuries of cultural change, core human anxieties remained largely constant. In considering the ancient texts and practices collectively, one sees a pattern. Humans have consistently sought to impose order on the unknown, to ritualize protection, and to encode moral and social lessons into supernatural narratives. The vampire, in this sense, is more than a monster. It is a cultural instrument, a vehicle for exploring ethical, existential, and metaphysical concerns. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, India, and Slavic lands, vampires served as mirrors, reflecting fears of death, disorder, and transgression while simultaneously offering mechanisms for coping with those fears. By the modern era, literature and popular culture transformed the vampire once more, stripping away some of its ritualistic and moralistic underpinnings to emphasize romance, horror, and aesthetic fascination. Yet when one returns to ancient texts, the original function of the vampire becomes clear. It is a symbol deeply rooted in the struggle to comprehend mortality, morality, and the tenuous boundary between life and death. The myths and rituals surrounding vampires illuminate not only what people feared, but how they lived, how they honored the dead, and how they attempted to maintain cosmic and social order in the face of inevitable decay. The story concludes not in a haunted castle or a blood-stained village, but in a dusty archive, where a scholar turns the pages of a 1,000-year-old manuscript. Within these texts, the echoes of ancient fears persist: the restless Akimu, the Ark of Egypt, the Lamia of Greece, the Pishashas of India, and the Upa of Slavic lands. Though the vampire has evolved in form and function, its essence endures, a reminder that across millennia, humanity has been haunted not merely by the supernatural, but by the profound mystery of life, death, and the space in between. And so, as night falls and the candlelight flickers over the manuscript, one can almost hear the whispers of those ancient voices, warning that the dead may not rest, that the boundaries of life are fragile, and that the stories we tell about monsters are ultimately stories about ourselves. Explanation of integration. Ancient Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Indian, and Slavic texts were used to show cultural universality of vampire myths. Rituals and practices, talismans, exhumation, staking, offerings, were included to connect textual references with real-world practices. The narrative explains symbolic functions of vampires: morality, social order, fear of death, and transgression. Historical transitions were noted, from ancient spirits to medieval revenants, to Renaissance scholarship, to modern literary vampire, showing continuity. Key ancient texts and practices are woven naturally into the story rather than treated as lists or footnotes. The modern legacy of ancient vampires. In the neon-lit city of Lysandra, where skyscrapers pierced the foggy night sky and drones hummed like electric insects, the legend of the vampires was no longer whispered in fear, it was traded in hushed boardroom conversations. Humanity had evolved, or so they thought, yet shadows lingered where the light of technology could not reach. Among these shadows, ancient lineages of vampires quietly endured, shaping the world in ways most humans would never comprehend. Evelyn Marlowe, a cybersecurity analyst by day and a historian by obsession, had always been fascinated by urban legends. Unlike her colleagues, who chased data breaches and firewalls, Evelyn chased myths, and what myths she pursued had teeth. Over years of sifting through old manuscripts, digital archives, and forgotten newspapers, she began to recognize patterns: disappearances, unsolved murders, and inexplicable wealth often traced back to the same names across centuries. She called them the patrons, a term she borrowed from medieval lore. Her investigation began innocuously. A series of corporate acquisitions caught her eye. One small biotech firm, Noctis Labs, had been bought by a mysterious conglomerate with no online presence. The firm's CEO, she discovered, had vanished in 1798 under suspicious circumstances, yet the company persisted, its leadership passing seamlessly across centuries. Evelyn's fascination became obsession. How could someone, or something, survive for over 200 years in plain sight? Her research led her to an underground network of scholars, journalists, and occult enthusiasts known as the Midnight Archive. In dimly lit basements and online forums encrypted beyond standard security protocols, they exchanged fragments of truth. It was there that Evelyn met Lucien Verrer, an enigmatic man with an unsettling calm and eyes that seemed to reflect centuries. "You're looking for the wrong thing," Lucian said when she confronted him about Noctis Labs. "You're trying to understand immortality through records and evidence. You must understand the legacy, not the lifeline." Lucian explained that the vampires of legend were real, but unlike their cinematic portrayals, they had adapted to the modern world. No longer confined to crypts or castles, they had infiltrated institutions, governments, corporations, and media conglomerates. They didn't feed openly on blood, rather, they siphoned influence, capital, and secrets. Power, they realized, could sustain them as effectively as hemoglobin ever had. Evelyn, skeptical yet intrigued, pressed him. "So they're like immortal CEOs?" "Precisely," Lucian replied, his smile almost human, almost predatory. "And their hunger is not quenched by mere riches. They crave legacy, influence, the continuation of their essence through the structures they manipulate. If humanity had a pulse, it is through them that it beats." Her research intensified. She discovered that vampires had been behind pivotal events for centuries: the formation of central banks, the Industrial Revolution, even the digital revolution. Their fingerprints were in art, literature, and policy. But the modern vampire, unlike its medieval counterpart, was cautious. It had learned to blend in, to avoid the recklessness that had once exposed its kind. One evening, while digging through Noctis Lab's old archives, Evelyn found a journal belonging to a woman named Isolde Varane, dated 1783. Isolde wrote of her transformation at the hands of a mysterious benefactor and her vow to survive, to adapt, to ensure that the lineage endured. Her words were hauntingly prescient. "The world changes, but hunger does not. We must change with it, or fade into the oblivion of time. Legacy is our immortality, influence our blood." Evelyn's heart pounded. The realization hit her like a blade. The vampires weren't hiding because they feared discovery, they were shaping humanity precisely so discovery would be meaningless. Her pursuit of truth came with consequences. Late one night, as she left her apartment, a shadow fell across the street. A man, impossibly still in the neon drizzle, stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. His skin was pale, almost luminescent, and his gaze was unnervingly deep. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "curiosity is dangerous, but not unwelcome. Some knowledge is a gift, some a curse. Which do you seek?" Evelyn, though trembling, met his eyes. "I want to know the truth." He nodded, as though he had been expecting her answer. "Then you must see the legacy for yourself." Lucian led her through the city, not through streets, but through hidden corridors and abandoned subway tunnels. Beneath Lysandra, the forgotten underworld had been transformed into a sanctuary. Libraries of rare manuscripts lined stone walls. Gardens with artificial sunlight flourished under the care of unseen hands. Here, the vampires lived not in terror of humanity, but alongside it, guiding it subtly. "They no longer kill for sustenance," Lucian explained. "They extract history, knowledge, loyalty. Their survival depends on the intricate dance of influence, not the spilling of blood. But even so, they are not harmless. The world they shape serves them first, humanity second. We are their canvas." Evelyn felt a shiver. In this hidden city beneath her own, she saw the weight of centuries. Machines powered by principles unknown, art and literature curated to preserve influence, and technology designed to sway opinions and markets. The modern vampire was not a predator in the traditional sense but a puppeteer, a curator of civilization itself. Her explorations unearthed a chilling pattern. The modern vampires had cultivated an elite class of humans, politicians, scientists, corporate leaders, who, knowingly or unknowingly, advanced their agenda. The lines between human and vampire blurred. Some humans were complicit, seduced by power or wealth, others oblivious, merely cogs in a vast machine of influence. Evelyn began to document everything, creating a digital archive encrypted beyond comprehension. But as she worked, she realized the moral complexity of her discovery. Exposing these vampires could destabilize society. Yet to ignore their existence was to allow centuries of manipulation to continue unchecked. It was then that she understood Lucian's earlier words. She was not seeking immortality, nor the thrill of revelation, she was confronting legacy itself. The vampire's enduring power was not a curse of blood but a testament to adaptation, intelligence, and patience. They were survivors in the truest sense, shaping a world that often believed it was shaping itself. Her contemplation was interrupted by a sudden sound, a whisper of wings, a rustle in the subterranean gardens. A figure approached, more imposing than Lucian, with eyes like molten silver. "You have seen too much," the figure said. "Yet you remain human. That is your advantage, and your weakness. What will you do with this knowledge?" Evelyn's mind raced. To expose the vampires would mean upheaval, chaos, perhaps even war. To conceal them was to live in complicity, aware but powerless to alter the centuries of influence around her. I will record the truth," she said finally, "but not for destruction. For understanding. So humanity may navigate its own legacy." The figure studied her, then inclined its head. "Wisely spoken. Legacy is not only inheritance but the responsibility to guide. Perhaps, in you, we see potential. Not as a predator, but as a witness." Lucian smiled faintly. "You have begun to understand. Immortality is not merely survival. It is adaptation, influence, and the quiet shaping of the world so that one's essence persists." In the months that followed, Evelyn's work became a subtle force in her own right. She published carefully curated research on power structures, historical anomalies, and the hidden currents of influence. No one would ever know that her insights stemmed from centuries-old bloodlines manipulating society from beneath the streets of Lysandra. Yet she had glimpsed the truth. Vampires were no longer just monsters of legend, they were the architects of civilization's invisible scaffolding. Humanity had become their canvas, and their legacy was written not in blood, but in influence, in culture, and in the unseen threads that bind the past to the present. Evelyn often walked the streets of Lysandra at night, the neon reflecting off rain-slicked asphalt, and imagined the centuries of unseen hands guiding every step. She understood, finally, that the modern vampire was not to be feared in the traditional sense. To fear them was to misunderstand them. They were survivors, strategists, and historians in their own right. Their hunger had evolved, and so had the world around them. And in the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by books, encrypted files, and faint traces of ancient bloodlines, Evelyn Marlowe smiled. For in knowing the legacy of the ancient vampires, she had glimpsed a truth far more enduring than terror, that history is alive, and those who endure shape it in ways both subtle and profound. In the modern age, vampires no longer haunted shadows, they inhabited power, legacy, and time itself. And perhaps, Evelyn thought, that was far more terrifying than any explanation of the story. Theme. The story explores the idea that ancient forces, here, vampires, have evolved alongside humanity, influencing society in subtle but profound ways. Unlike traditional vampire lore, which emphasizes predation and horror, the narrative focuses on adaptation, survival, and the long-term shaping of civilization. It examines how power, influence, and legacy can be as potent as supernatural bloodlust. Characters. Evelyn Marlowe, a human historian whose curiosity drives the plot. She represents humanity's desire to understand hidden truths. Lucien Veyre, a modern vampire, enigmatic and wise, who guides Evelyn to understand the subtlety of vampire survival in the modern world. Isolde Varenne, historical figure representing the continuity of vampire influence and their adaptation across centuries. The shadow figure symbolizes the moral and ethical complexity of knowing such truths, emphasizing that legacy carries responsibility. Setting. Lysandra, a neon-drenched, futuristic city where technology and urban life mask ancient secrets. Subterranean world, a hidden vampire sanctuary beneath the city, symbolizing the unseen but pervasive influence of the vampires. Modern vampire concept. Vampires are reimagined as manipulators of influence rather than mere predators of blood. They use wealth, knowledge, and social systems to maintain their legacy. The story bridges ancient myth and contemporary society, showing evolution of the vampire archetype. Key messages. Legacy over immortality. True survival comes from influencing the world and being remembered. Power as a form of sustenance. Modern vampires feed on culture, history, and societal structures. Ethical complexity of knowledge. Understanding hidden truths can be dangerous, but responsible use of knowledge can guide humanity. Style. Written in third-person limited perspective, mostly following Evelyn. A mix of descriptive urban imagery and introspective philosophical musings. Suspenseful tone without relying on jump scares, emphasizing psychological and societal horror. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the secret history of vampires. From ancient myths to hidden truths in folklore, we've uncovered how these enigmatic creatures have shaped human imagination across centuries. Whether you believe vampires were ever real or simply symbols of our deepest fears, their legends continue to captivate and haunt us. If you enjoyed diving into the dark mysteries of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more explorations into the unknown. Share your thoughts and favorite vampire legends in the comments. We'd love to hear which tales sent shivers down your spine.